All the while, Fox News blares in the living room. My parents, not me. Hey guys, how are you? And after a needlessly long hiatus, welcome back to Now and Then, a series in which I take a look at select political satire and or comedy films from 1933 to 2020. I'm creator and host Shane McCarthy, and before I start, I'd like to make a few announcements. First, until further notice, this is a new location. Second, the format is going to change from a 4-part discussion to a 3-part discussion, with the review section being excised until further notice. Reviews of this film and other affected films, if any, will be a separate video. I know, I'll miss the self-indulgence too. The format change is temporary for now for the sake of efficiency. Even then, you cannot get rid of my snarky self-indulgence. For those who are bummed, all I can say is, sorry. Also, if you hear an echo, blame the architects. Now let's smoke on over to 1988 with They Live. Hello, a dog joined us. She seems sweet. Moving on. They Live is a satirical sci-fi action comedy and an adaptation of the 1963 Ray Nelson short story 8 O'Clock in the Morning. Produced by Larry Franco and directed by John Carpenter, who also wrote the script under the pseudonym Frank Armitage. Headline the film are Rowdy Roddy Piper, Keith David, and Meg Foster. Support players we are limited to George Buck Flower, Raymond St. Jacques, Peter Jason, Jason Barber III, Cy Richardson, and Norman Alden. After the last factory in his hometown shutters, a drifter, unnamed in the film but referred to the credits as Nada, hops a train to Los Angeles in search for work. While a trip to the city's employment office falls flat, he does manage to find and secure a job at a construction site, where he meets and befriends Frank Armitage, a homeless black man with a wife and son living in a different state. Nada makes himself comfy within a homeless community in which Frank also resides, across the street from a church where a street preacher claims they are controlling the rich and powerful and that's why they're in the state they're currently in. After the homeless camp is destroyed, Nada runs to the church and discovers sunglasses with unorthodox effects. After getting to a safe space and putting them on, he realizes that the glasses reveal the true messages behind advertisements and also that some humans are actually aliens disguised as them. With this newfound discovery, he arms up and gets ready to take them down, once and for all. The film's targets are elitism, propaganda, the media, and Reaganomics, if not the entirety of laissez-faire capitalism. Crap, the dog just left. I'm sad now, moving on. 1988, the end of an era. Or at least for Reagan. The 1980 election season was officially gearing up, with Republican George H.W. Bush, Reagan's vice president, and Democrat Michael Dukakis fighting for the Oval Office. Also some other candidates existed. And as usual, only Democrats and Republicans fought for control of both houses of Congress. Ronald Reagan's administration was officially wrapping up. And at first glance, they seemed to be closing out on a high note, especially after Carter and the 82 recession. Annual GDP growth was not only consistently positive, but the overall GDP went from $2.3 trillion to $5.3 trillion. Productivity was up, unemployment was falling, and so was inflation. Also, new home sales were slightly up from last year. Also, the poverty rate and the amount of people in poverty fell. Arguments aside, they really recovered after the 82 recession. And all of that was thanks to Reaganomics. Maybe. For those who don't know, Reaganomics, officially known as supply-side economics and also known as trickle-down economics, is the economic theory, of sorts, where if by giving tax cuts to the rich and corporations, they would have extra money that they would use to reinvest back into their companies and other sorts and help create more jobs and expand the economy. Data would like to speak with you. Not that one! Some highly criticized Reaganomics at the time, way before They Live, most notably Walter Mondale during his ill-fated 1984 presidential run. Debates aside, even Reagan couldn't do a complete 180 of Carter. The minimum wage, which was last updated January 1st, 1981, back when Carter was still president, had remained stagnant throughout Reagan's entire tenure, despite increases in the cost of living and housing prices, and despite inflation not being as big of a deal as last time, it still existed. Even with all that new spending, we just didn't have enough revenues to offset that, and thus it was deficits year after year after year after year. And so on. Not only were deficits constant, but public debt was up and rising. Even then, poverty wasn't still being solved, as not only was it higher during Carter, it almost became stagnant after a while. Not only were more people on Medicaid, but the amount spent on it was going up. Not to mention the temporary assistance for needy families cases stagnated at best, and slightly rose at worst. Births went up, but so did deaths. And while more people were covered under health insurance, percentage-wise it was actually falling. Well, at least life expectancy was up. And while new home sales were up, they were long past their peak. Homelessness wasn't just concentrated in the big cities, it was nationwide. Not to mention cuts to domestic social programs only made things more desperate for those affected. Too bad the economic boom was enough to save banks. In fact, more failed than ever before. Also, the Gini Index, measuring wealth inequality, was rising. Sometimes I wish these tax brackets were a joke. Overall, we think that the more Keynesian fiscal actions under the administration is what actually saved the economy. Also supplemented the damage enacted by Reaganomics. And therein lies arguably the biggest scandal of his career. The Iran-Contra affair. For those who don't know, the Reagan administration illegally sold arms to Lebanon in exchange for American hostages and funneled most, if not all, of that money to Nicaraguan militias for imperialist purposes. Adding fuel to the fires that the CIA was assisting Nicaraguan cartels and militias with smuggling crack cocaine to the United States, which eventually got displaced in low-income and black neighborhoods, setting off the crack epidemic and further fueling and expanding the drug war. The scary thing is the American public wasn't notified about it until the year before. And by then, it had been going on since '82. Remember, before this, there was Panama. And then Chile. Not to mention this being only the third president after Nixon and another Republican only added fuel to the fire. In fact, '88 was the beginning of the official investigation. Not to mention before the end of the year, there were two convictions. Oliver North and John Poindexter. And if the Iran-Contra affair scandal wasn't the worst of his career, it was definitely the HIV/AIDS epidemic. Even though it was officially declared an epidemic, the response from the administration was ambivalent at best and callous at worst. Despite constant cries and pleas from private and public research institutions for research money and research grants, they were ignored. Also, a major contributor to that was the conservative Christian evangelical mindset that was highly prominent within its members and its demographics. Jerry Falwell was already bad enough, but then White House Communications Director Pat Buchanan decided to proclaim AIDS as nature's revenge on gay men. Despicable ignorance aside, AIDS affects everyone, regardless of sexuality. In fact, HIV/AIDS wasn't just being spread through unprotected sex, but also from contaminated blood transfusions and sharing of needles during illicit drug use. In addition to that, the administration was also pushing abstinence education instead of safe-sex education, despite the latter having much more statistically preferable outcomes. And as expected, blacks were especially disproportionately affected by the crisis. Not to mention the drug war was only getting worse. Expanded militarization of the police and harsher sentences for drug traffickers just wasn't doing anything. Nancy Reagan's Just Say No campaign didn't do anything. Not to mention, of course, the constant cuts to domestic social programs only made things worse and more desperate for people. And of course, it disproportionately affected black and low-income people. And blacks would be especially disproportionately incarcerated. Even though tensions were far less great than previously, the Cold War just wouldn't end. Well, at least the Iran-Iraq War was finally over. At a stalemate. Yay, she's back again. I'm happy now. Let's go. H. W. Bush won the election by a landslide, with Democrats not only maintaining control of both houses of Congress, something which they garnered back in '86, but actually gaining one seat in the Senate and two in the House. And also Bush won everybody over with, read my lips, no new taxes. Ow. That was a hilarious promise, wasn't it? The Iran-Contra affair investigation would conclude in '92 with no definitive link to Reagan, but a total of 11 convictions, all of which would be pardoned that same year by H. W. Bush. The spirit of Reaganomics would continue in the form of tax cuts enacted by both the W. Bush and Trump administrations. While I couldn't find much information on who benefited the most from the Bush tax cuts, when it comes to the Trump tax cuts, according to the Tax Policy Center, 83% went to the top 1%, and the rest went to everybody else. In fact, Trump made the corporate tax rate flat, the first time in decades. Also, here's a hot take. Flat tax rates are regressive tax rates. Not to mention, under Bush and Trump came two of the biggest recessions in recent memory. The Great Recession in 2008, and the COVID-19 recession in 2020. In 2017, PBS NewsHour did a report on Kansas and the results of their 2012 experiment in which they cut taxes and cut social spending in hopes of it spurring the economy. It did the opposite. In fact, moderate Republican Melissa Rooker spoke out against it. Clinton and Obama didn't transition to Obamaeconomics, but they did lessen the blow of supply side through greater top tax increases, which helped reduce deficits. All I'm saying is Obamaeconomics sounds more logical, and there's also data backing it up. Also, the current national minimum wage, that being $7.25, has not budged at all since 2009, the longest period of stagnation in U.S. history. Also, the Gini index will continue to increase, and not just under Bush and Trump, but every administration following Reagan. Allow me to provide a proper applause for a brand new Gilded Age. As mentioned numerous times, mostly on Twitter, the top 1% have as much wealth as the bottom 90%. And counting. Also, 2019, a film within the spirit of They Live would be released. Sorry to bother you. Like They Live, it is a satirical sci-fi comedy, but this time without action and not based on any pre-existing work. Also tonally, it's a lot more surrealist and doesn't involve aliens. I actually saw it when it came out in theaters and really enjoyed it, but I haven't seen it since, even though I probably should. Though I do remember thinking it could have been a lot better as a miniseries because there was a lot of commentary in that film. Like They Live, it's against current economic policies, but allows you to formulate your own reasonable solutions. This being a genre would be hilarious, but it would weaken the meaning. Also, rich are making good cases against further taxation when they exploit tax, credit, and interest loopholes, and also a Provoca report came out revealing the true tax rate of the richest individuals being far lower than that of working and middle-class Americans, and also the mass explosions of their fortunes during the pandemic. In the wake of the Great Recession came Occupy Wall Street, an ambitious, decentralized movement to hold big money and special interests accountable, but unfortunately fizzled out due to no leadership, no plan, and no real momentum. In the wake of the COVID recession came the Great Resignation, a mass walking out and signing off of frontline or bottom-line workers demanding better pay, working conditions, benefits, among other things. One of the most notable victories, of course, was for John Deere. One could reasonably argue that big money is the reason why third parties aren't a thing, let alone a multi-party state, but I would actually argue it's that, plurality voting, and gerrymandering. Even Open Secrets, a site disclosing the funding sources of politicians, hasn't done anything. In fact, how many stories have you had already on politicians being bought with big money that aren't Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema? Maybe they are right. Arrogance is a symptom of being a politician. Considering that the PRO Act didn't pass, and of course, the billionaire's tax is still kind of in negotiation, who knows what's going to happen? I'm not entirely sure of the exact trajectory when it comes to the taxation of the rich and the corporations, but who knows? Maybe something closer to the golden age of the 50s and 60s. And that's all she wrote. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. I hope it was worth the wait. Like, comment, share, subscribe, however suits you best. Thank you guys for watching. Until the next video, see ya.